Greetings, road warriors. Tonight our chronicle covers the digital highways, the coded streets, and the sheer, unadulterated persistence that built a global phenomenon from a tiny office in the heart of Europe. We're talking about the making of Euro Truck Simulator 2. We're peeling back the dashboard, tracing the wires from the 12-volt, and looking at the silicon heart that beats beneath the polished chrome. We see the final product, a sprawling map that feels almost impossibly large, a garage filled with licensed rigs that gleam under the virtual sun, and a freight market that, on some days, feels more reliable than the real one. It's a place of quiet zen, a digital sanctuary where the only things that matter are the road ahead, the next drop-off, and the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers in a simulated downpour. But this empire of pixels, this quiet juggernaut of the simulation world, didn't just appear, it was forged. It was forged in a time before virtual reality, before 4K textures, and before influencer was a job title. Let's be honest, backing a 53-foot trailer into a tight spot on the first try is a feeling that never gets old. That sense of subtle, personal victory is the core of this entire experience, and the story of the game's creation is a similar tale of navigating tight spots with patience and a clear goal. This is the story of a small team that had a very specific, very niche, and, to many at the time, a very strange idea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support is what keeps this rig rolling down the long dark highway of content creation. And while you're at it, please post your location and local time in the comments. It's always a humbling experience to see just how far this broadcast reaches, from a late night haul in Ohio to an early morning in Perth. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story doesn't begin in a sprawling tech campus in California. It doesn't start with venture capital and a flashy press conference. It starts, as so many of the best things do, in a garage, or at least in the spirit of a garage. The year is 1997. The city is Prague in the Czech Republic. The air in Prague during the late 90s was thick with a new kind of energy. The old walls of the city, steeped in centuries of complex history, were now the backdrop for a generation diving headfirst into the new digital frontier. It was a place of opportunity, a place where a few clever minds with a shared passion could, perhaps, build something out of nothing. This is where we meet our protagonists, not rugged truckers, not logistics barons, but a small group of software developers. Their names were Pavel Scheber, Martin Chesky, and Peter Scheber. They weren't a household name. They weren't, at this point, even a company. They were just three minds who saw the potential in the burgeoning world of 3D graphics and personal computing. So they did what ambitious creators do. They formed a company. They gave it a name that was practical, professional, and perhaps just a little bit cryptic: SCS Software. It wasn't until years later that most fans would learn the truth that the name was no great corporate mystery. It was simply an initialism of their three surnames: Scheber, Chesky, Scheber. This is our key historical fact for this leg of the journey. SCS Software was officially founded in Prague in 1997. This wasn't a spin-off of a larger publisher. It was a ground-up independent studio, born in a country that was itself redefining its place in the new Europe. Their initial vision wasn't, as you might expect, to build a trucking empire. That dream was, as they've called it, a distant one. Their primary, practical goal was to be a technology supplier. They were building an engine. In the world of video games, an engine is the complex framework of code that handles everything: how light reflects off a surface, how a vehicle's wheels interact with the ground, how the game's world is loaded and rendered. They called their engine Prism through D. Their business model was to perfect this technology and then license it out to other, larger game companies, to be the silent partner, the technical wizards behind someone else's curtain. It was a sensible plan. It was a humble plan. It was in many ways the exact opposite of the grand, open-world freedom their future games would champion. This brings us to our technical detail: the Prism 3D engine itself. In 1997, 3D graphics were still in their awkward adolescence. Think sharp polygons, blurry textures that looked like they'd been photocopied onto a piece of cardboard, and physics that were, to be generous, enthusiastic. The team at SCS, however, was focused on building something robust. They were tinkering with code that could, in theory, simulate large environments and the movement of vehicles within them. Their engine was being licensed for other projects, little-known games that needed a 3D foundation. It was a nuts and bolts operation. They were, in essence, digital mechanics, honing their tools, learning the intricacies of code, and all the while, that distant dream of making their own games flickered on the horizon. This work, this day-in, day-out grind of engine development, was crucial. It was the training ground. Every line of code they wrote for another company's project was a lesson learned, a problem solved. They were building their expertise one contract at a time in the relative obscurity of Prague. And that's our human element for tonight. The image of these three founders. It's easy to imagine them in a small, cluttered office, perhaps with a view of Prague's ancient rooftops, surrounded by beige tower PCs humming away. They weren't just business partners. Two of them were brothers, Pavel and Petr. There's a unique dynamic in a family-run business, a level of trust and, let's be real, probably a unique level of unfiltered argument that can forge something incredibly strong. They weren't chasing the latest trend. They weren't trying to create the next big action hero. They were instead quietly becoming experts in a field that almost no one else was paying attention to: the simulation of the mundane. They were fascinated by the simple, complex act of driving. While other studios were simulating dogfights in space or magic-wielding elves, the team at SCS was tinkering with virtual differentials and rudimentary suspension models. This was their passion. This was their niche. They weren't just developers. They were, at heart, simulators. They believed that a game didn't need explosions every 3 seconds to be compelling. They believed that, for a certain kind of person, the challenge of navigating a large vehicle through a complex environment was a game in itself, and they were about to be proven right. Their work as a technology supplier was paying the bills, but the dream of creating their own title, their own world, was growing. The Prism's D engine was getting stronger. Their skills were sharper. The market for PC games was expanding. The time was coming to take their first tentative step out of the garage and onto the open road. They wouldn't be licensing their tech this time. They would be building their own house, on their own foundation. They just needed a subject, something big, something powerful, something American. The first seed of what would become a global trucking dynasty was planted. It wasn't called Eurotruck, it was called Hard Truck, and it would set the stage for everything that was to come. That seed, Hard Truck, 18 Wheels of Steel, landed in 2002. This wasn't the Hard Truck titles that had come before, which were more chaotic arcade-style races published by others. This was SCS Software's first, true, focused attempt to build their dream. Published by ValueSoft, a company known for budget-friendly titles you'd find in a bargain bin at a department store, it wasn't a blockbuster. But it didn't need to be. It just needed to find its people, and it did. This title, and the many rapid-fire sequels that followed, became the foundation of the 18 Wheels of Steel dynasty. This is our key historical fact for this section. The 18 Wheels of Steel series, starting in 2002, was not a single game but a prolific franchise, often releasing a new installment almost yearly. Across America, Pedal to the Metal, Convoy, Holland, American Long Haul. For a solid decade, SCS Software was the undisputed king of the budget trucking sim. They weren't just making games, they were churning out a new American road trip every 12 months. This relentless release schedule was a product of its time. These were not live service games. There were no seasonal updates, no downloadable content, no microtransactions. You bought the box, you played the game, and a year later, you bought the new box, which was, if we're being charitable, a heavily refined version of the last one. This iterative process, this constant grind of publishing and developing, was SCS's real-world driving school. They were learning in public how to build a better truck. The core gameplay loop was established almost immediately, and it was lethally addictive. You started as a driver for hire, a nobody with a CB radio and a dream. You earned money, you bought your first truck, probably a boxy, low-poly rig that looked more like a child's drawing of a truck, and you became an owner-operator. Then you hired other drivers, bought them trucks, and managed a growing, if slightly beige, logistics empire. This economic simulation, this gentle climb from rags to rigs, was the secret. It wasn't just about the driving, it was about building something. This brings us to our technical detail, the maps. Oh, the maps. To a modern ETS2 player, the worlds of the 18 Wheels of Steel series are a geological curiosity. The world of, say, across America, was a vast, sprawling, and utterly empty rendition of the United States. Cities were often just a few intersections, a couple of warehouses represented by identical grey buildings, and a gas station. You'd drive for miles down a perfectly straight two-lane road, flanked on either side by a texture that was generically green or generically desert. Then you'd hit an invisible wall, turn 90 degrees at the only possible intersection, and drive for another 20 minutes. It was less of an open world and more of a very, very long corridor. And yet, it worked. The sheer scale of it, the feeling of crossing a continent was implied, and our imaginations filled in the rest. We forgave the fact that Chicago and St. Louis looked suspiciously like they were built by the same very tired architect. And who was we? Who was playing these strange, repetitive, and deeply charming games? This is our human element. The community was a fascinating and dedicated mix. You had, of course, actual long-haul truckers, sitting in their real-life sleepers, with a laptop perched on the dash, unwinding from a 10-hour drive by doing a 10-hour drive. The irony was lost on no one. You had retired drivers reliving the glory days, but the vast majority were people who had never set foot in a Class 8 rig. They were office workers, students, parents, people from all over the world who just wanted to chill. They found a meditative peace in the digital highway. The forums from that era are a beautiful time capsule. People weren't just playing, they were role-playing. They gave their virtual companies names, they wrote driver logs of their digital journeys. They argued passionately over which low-polygon truck had the best feel. They were a quiet, dedicated, and deeply underserved audience. They didn't want to shoot aliens. They didn't want to save a princess. They just wanted to deliver 40,000 pounds of virtual lumber from Miami to Seattle, on time, and without flipping their rig on that one weirdly sharp corner just outside of El Paso. With each new installment, the Prism 3D engine, that humble piece of code from their Prague office, was getting stronger. Haul-In in 2006 was a fan favourite, a moment where the physics, the graphics, and the business simulation all took a noticeable leap forward. The trucks started to feel like they had weight. The environments, while still sparse, felt a little more believable. SCS was meticulously reinvesting their earnings, not in fancy marketing, but in the code itself. They were still the same small, quiet team in the Czech Republic, but they were now the captains of a very profitable, if niche, digital shipping line. But after nearly a decade of crisscrossing the digital United States, a change was in the air. The 18 Wheels of Steel formula, while profitable, was becoming a gilded cage. The team at SCS, based in the heart of Europe, looked out their windows and saw a very different kind of trucking. They saw narrow roads, ancient cities, and a patchwork of countries with different rules, different trucks, and different challenges. They saw cab-over designs, not the long-nosed conventionals of America. They saw roundabouts. So many roundabouts. The 18 Wheels of Steel series had been the perfect long-haul journey. It had built the company, paid the bills, and created a loyal fan base. It was the financial and technical runway they needed. Now it was time to take all those lessons, all that code, and all that quiet ambition, and bring it home. They were about to take their first real gamble. They were going to try and build a truck simulator for their own backyard. So, the decision was made. After a decade of mastering the long, straight, and relatively simple highways of the digital United States, the team at SCS Software was coming home. But this homecoming was fraught with risk. The 18 Wheels of Steel series was their bread and butter. It was a known quantity. The fans were loyal, and they knew exactly what they were getting. A big American rig, a sprawling, if simplistic map, and the satisfying loop of building a business. Now, SCS was about to ask this loyal fan base, many of whom were in North America, to trade in their chrome-nosed Peterbilts for a flat-faced cab-over. They were asking them to trade the wide-open plains of Texas for the narrow, bottlenecked streets of Warsaw? It was a gamble. In 2008, that gamble was released to the world. It was called simply Euro Truck Simulator. Not 2, just Euro Truck Simulator. This, the original ETS, is a fascinating artifact. It is the missing link, the awkward teenage phase between the established 18 wheels of steel formula and the polished masterpiece that would follow. It was, in every sense of the word, an experiment, a test. This is our key historical fact for this leg of the journey. Euro Truck Simulator 1, released in 2008, was SCS Software's first dedicated attempt to simulate the European trucking environment, and it was built upon the existing framework of their American games. It wasn't a revolution, it was a reskin, but a reskin so profound it changed everything. It took the core business loop of 18 wheels of steel, haul-in, and transplanted it into a brand new and frankly bizarre European map. The game was, to put it kindly, a bit rough. The AI drivers seemed to possess a collective death wish, often swerving directly into your path for no discernible reason. The physics were floaty. The trucks felt less like 40-ton behemoths and more like slightly angry cardboard boxes. And the brands. Oh, the brands. This was long before SCS had the clout to get real licenses. Players were treated to a lineup of beautifully awkward knockoffs. You didn't drive a Scania, you drove a Swift. You didn't drive a Mercedes-Benz, you drove a Majestic. You had the Runner and the Valiant, all of which looked just like the real thing if you were squinting from about 100 meters away. But none of that mattered, because the game did something. It captured an essence. For European players, it was the first time they could drive on the left side of the road in a game that wasn't a high-speed racer. The inclusion of the UK, with its right-hand drive trucks and bafflingly complex roundabouts, was a revelation. This brings us to our technical detail, the map of ETS1. It was not an open world, it was a clever and deeply flawed illusion of a map. It was essentially a connect to the dots of major European cities. You had London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Madrid, Warsaw, but the world only existed on the main highways connecting them. You couldn't, as you can now, decide to take a scenic detour down a country lane. If you were driving from Paris to Berlin, you were on that specific predefined corridor. There were no other roads. The cities themselves were tiny, often consisting of just a few intersections, a depot to drop your cargo, and a hotel to rest. It was a stage play, a facade. But what a facade it was. It gave the impression of a continent. It was the first time a game had tried to stitch together this many different countries, with their different road signs, different speed limits, and different feel, into one cohesive, drivable world. It was a monumental achievement in clever shortcuts, and this created a powerful, unexpected reaction, our human element for this section, the shock of recognition. While American players were grappling with the confusing lack of long-nosed trucks, European players were experiencing something else entirely. They were driving along on a motorway that was generically European, and then they'd see it. A road sign, a speed limit sign, a gantry sign over the autobahn. And it would be correct, or at least correct-ish. The font might be wrong, the colour's a bit off, but the design, the symbol, it was the sign they saw every day on their real-life commute. The forums of the time were filled with these little moments of discovery. I'm from the UK and I almost crashed my Swift when I saw the M25 junction sign. Or, the way the roads narrow in the Italian cities is exactly right. It was, of course, a very simplified version, but it was their version. SCS had accidentally tapped into a deep regional pride. They weren't just simulating trucks, they were simulating home. Commercially, the game was a modest success. It proved, definitively, that the market for a European trucking simulation existed. It was a viable, profitable idea. But for the team at SCS, it was a test that revealed more problems than it solved. They had pushed the old Prism 3D engine, the one built for the wide open spaces of America, to its absolute breaking point. to render the dense, complex cities of Europe even as a facade. They had used every trick, every shortcut, every last bit of processing power. They looked at their creation, this game that fans were enjoying, and they knew it wasn't it. It wasn't the dream. The dream was a real map. A map where you could actually get lost. A map with small roads, with villages, with a sense of place that wasn't just a backdrop. The dream was real trucks, not the majestic or the valiant. The dream was physics that felt like weight, not like a hovercraft. The lessons learned from Euro Truck Simulator 1 were profound. Lesson 1. People will buy this. The audience is there. Lesson 2. Our current technology is a dead end. We cannot build the game we want to build by simply making ETS 1.5. We can't just iterate. They had to go back to the garage. They had to take the reliable, familiar, and now, hopelessly, outdated Prism 3D engine, the engine that had powered their company for over a decade, and they had to tear it apart down to the studs. They needed to build a new foundation, a foundation capable of holding the weight of an entire continent. The success of ETS1 wasn't a finish line. It was the starting gun for a project so ambitious, it would take them 4 more years of grueling, silent development to even show it to the world. The European test was over. It was a success, and as a result, everything had to change. The team at SCS Software was now standing on a very dangerous, very exhilarating cliff edge. Below them was the safe, comfortable, and profitable valley of the 18 Wheels of Steel franchise. They could, quite easily, return to it. They could churn out American Long Haul 2 or Pedal to the Metal, reloaded and pay the bills indefinitely. The fan base was there, and the work was, by now, routine. Behind them was the experiment of Euro Truck Simulator 1. It had been a modest success, a proof of concept, but they knew in their bones that it was a technical dead end. The applause it received was for the idea, not the execution. To follow it up with a simple ETS 1 farce would be a betrayal of that idea. So, they stood on that cliff edge, looked at each other, and decided to jump. Not down into the safe valley, but across to the impossibly distant, fog-shrouded peak on the other side. This was the moment the blueprint for Euro Truck Simulator 2 was conceived, and it was, by their standards, astronomically ambitious. This wasn't going to be an iteration. This was going to be a reboot, a ground-up reimagining of what a trucking simulator could be. The vision was no longer just to simulate driving. The vision was to simulate being a trucker. The whole life, the business, the customization, the pride in the rig, the sheer, zen-like exhaustion of a long haul. The first item on this grand blueprint was the world itself. The connect-the-dots corridor-style map of ETS1 was thrown in the bin. The new vision was for a real world, not a 1.1 scale, which would be technically impossible and frankly boring to play. But a world that felt 1-1. This is a crucial distinction. They wanted to capture the essence of the countries. They wanted a player to know they were in Germany because of the design of the Autobahn gantries, the specific green of the road signs, and the architecture of the farmhouses in the distance. They wanted them to know they were in the UK not just from driving on the left, but from the claustrophobic narrowness of an A road, the distinctive white-on-blue motorway signs, and the ever-present drizzle. This brings us to our technical detail for this section, the decision that would define the game's entire feel, the 1:19 scale. After much internal debate and prototyping, this was the golden ratio they landed on. For every 1 kilometre driven in the game, 19 kilometres passed in the real world. This was the sweet spot. It was small enough to allow for a tangible, massive map that could span a continent, yet large enough to make a journey feel like a journey. A drive from, say, London to Paris wouldn't take 3 real-time hours, but it wouldn't be over in 15 minutes either. It was the perfect compromise between realism and fun. For cities, this scale would shrink even further, to 1.3, allowing for dense, complex street networks, without them needing to be the size of an entire real-world country. This scale was the fundamental, physics, the DNA of the new world they were building. The second pillar of the blueprint was authenticity. No more swift or majestic. The team was sick of them. The goal, laid out in these early planning documents, was to get the 7 sisters, the major European truck manufacturers, Scania, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, MAN, DAF, Renault, Iveco. They wanted them all. This was a near impossible dream for a small studio in Prague. They weren't a billion-dollar EA Sports franchise. They were a niche simulation company. They had no idea the years of legal wrangling, the sheer volume of polite, persistent emails and phone calls that lay ahead of them. But the goal was set. The game had to have real trucks. Finally, the third pillar, the player. The blueprint outlined a deep, engaging role-playing system. In ETS1 and 18 Wheels, the business was a simple loop. In ETS2, they envisioned a true RPG. You would start as a driver for hire, a nobody taking quick jobs in other people's trucks. You'd save up, take out a bank loan, a feature they were determined to model realistically, and buy your first truck. This truck would be your home. You'd be able to customize it. Paint jobs, yes, but also lights, bull bars, horns, interior accessories. You could hang a pennant from the window. This focus on personalization was at the heart of the new vision. This would be your company, your rig. This leads to our key historical fact. The development of Euro Truck Simulator 2 officially began around 2009, and it would not be released until October 2012. This represented a 4-year development cycle. For a company that had previously released a new game almost every single year, this was an eternity. It was a sign of a profound shift in philosophy. They were trading the quick, iterative, budget title model for the long, slow, high-stakes development of a true Ekiche independent game. This 4-year gap was where the magic and the suffering would happen, and the human element in all this? The sheer, quiet audacity of the SCS team led by CEO Pavel Shabor. Imagine the meetings, imagine the spreadsheets. They were essentially betting their entire company, which they had spent a decade building, on this one project. They were committing to 4 years of expense, with almost no new revenue coming in. They kept the lights on by releasing a few final, smaller-scale 18 Wheels titles, and a side project, German Truck Simulator, which was in many ways a technical testbed for the new ideas. But all the real effort, all the best minds, were focused on the secret, all-consuming project, ETS2. They weren't just developers, they were true believers. They believed, in a way the rest of the industry did not, that a slow and non-violent, meticulous simulation of a blue-collar job could be a work of art. They believed it could be a global hit. This blueprint wasn't just a plan for a new game, it was a declaration of intent. It was SCS Software saying, "We are done making budget, titles. We're going to make our masterpiece." There was only one problem. The ambitious blueprint was written, the team was ready, the vision was clear, but the tool to build it, the engine, it didn't exist. The old Prism 3D, the one that powered ETS1, would buckle, melt, and burst into flames if they tried to build this new world with it. They had to build the forge before they could craft the sword. The grand blueprint was pinned to the wall. It was ambitious, it was beautiful, and it was, with their current technology, completely impossible. The team at SCS Software, fresh off the modest success of Euro Truck Simulator 1 and the lessons it had taught them, now faced the single largest hurdle of their entire history. It wasn't a publisher, it wasn't a lack of ideas, it was their own engine. The trusty Prism 3D, the engine that had been with them since 1997, the one that powered Hard Truck and every 18 Wheels of Steel game, was at the end of its life. It was a 20th century tool, and they were trying to build a 21st century masterpiece. It had been designed for those long, empty American corridors. To ask it to render a 1/19 scale, fully dynamic, customizable, and seamless, Europe would be like asking a horse-drawn carriage to win a Formula 1 race. It would simply disintegrate. They had to go back to the source code. This wasn't a simple upgrade. This was a gut renovation. A complete down-to-the-foundation rewrite of millions of lines of code. This, right here, is the key historical fact of the game's creation. The 4-year development gap between 2008's ETS1 and 2012's ETS2 was not spent making the game. It was spent rebuilding the Prism 3D engine from the ground up, specifically to handle the new ambitious vision. While it kept the name Prism 3D, The version that runs ETS2 is a fundamentally different beast from its predecessors, sharing more in spirit than in actual code. This was the great, silent, unglamorous work. It was years of programmers staring at compilers, rewriting rendering pipelines, and building systems that would, theoretically, one day make a game. The first and most colossal challenge was the world itself. The blueprint demanded a seamless open world at a 1/19 scale. The old engine just couldn't. It loaded small self-contained areas, the connect the dots model. This brings us to our first technical detail, the creation of the new world streaming and level of detail (LOD) systems. The new engine had to be able to see the entire massive map, but only load the tiny high-detail slice that was immediately around the player. As the truck moved at 90 km/h, the engine had to, in real time, throw away the scenery in the rearview mirror and simultaneously build the scenery on the horizon, all without a single loading screen or stutter. This required a level of data management and asset streaming they had never even attempted. They had to invent tools just to build the map, let alone run it. The second technical mountain was light. The worlds of 18 wheels and ETS1 were, to be blunt, flat. They were lit by a simple static sun that was either on, day, or off, night. The blueprint demanded life. It demanded realism. This meant a new dynamic weather and lighting model. The rebuilt Prism-SD had to calculate in real time the position of the sun as it arced across the sky. It had to cast long, moving shadows at sunrise and sunset. It had to render the volumetric glow of your headlights in a sudden fog bank. And then, the rain. Oh, the rain. They didn't just want a rain filter, they wanted physicality. They wanted the road to look wet. They wanted to code a new wetness shader that would make asphalt look dark and slick, reflecting the streetlights. They had to program the physics and timing of the windshield wipers, a seemingly simple thing that is, in coding, a nightmare of timers and overlapping animations. But the third and perhaps most complex technical challenge was the truck itself. The blueprint demanded RPG-level customization and licensed authentic rigs. In the old games, a truck was a single, complete 3D model. It was one object, like a rock or a building. You couldn't change it. The new Prism through D had to be completely modular. A truck in ETS2 is not one object. It's a collection of hundreds. It's a base chassis, a cabin, a set of wheels, a grille, a mirror, an engine, a transmission, all existing as separate slots. The new engine had to be able to bolt all these pieces together, on the fly, in the truck configurator menu. It had to know that this light bar was compatible with this cabin, but not that one. This modular system was the only way they could ever offer the level of personalization they dreamed of. And the human element? This was the long winter of development. For 2 or 3 years there was no game, there was no driving, there was nothing fun. It was just the grinding, thankless and terrifyingly expensive work of building the factory. Imagine the stress. The company's revenues were drying up as the 18-wheel series was wound down. The team was in the dark, wrestling with buggy, half-finished code. There were no doubt moments where the whole project must have seemed like madness. This was the period where the artists couldn't build cities, because the map editor tools weren't finished. The designers couldn't test the economy, because the truck customization system didn't work. It was all on the programmers. The entire company's future, the entire grand blueprint, was resting on the shoulders of this small core of engine coders in Prague, who were trying to build a stable, working foundation out of thin air and sheer willpower. Finally, after years of this silent struggle, the new engine sputtered to life. It was fragile, it was buggy, but it worked. They could load a test map, they could place a single, untextured, unlicensed truck model on a stretch of grey, untextured road. And under a new, dynamically calculated sun, they could drive it. The foundation was built. It had cost them years. Now, they could finally start building the game, and their first task? To go, cap in hand, to some of the largest, most conservative corporations in the world and ask them for their keys. The new Prism 3D engine was humming. It was a fragile, complex and beautiful new machine, built over years of silent, agonizing work. The new modular truck system was in place, a series of slots and sockets waiting to be filled. But now the team at SCS faced a challenge that was not about code, but about persuasion. They had built a spectacular high-tech garage, and it was completely empty. To fulfill the grand blueprint, they couldn't just model a truck. They had to get the real trucks. They had to go, cap in hand, to the Seven Sisters. These were the 7 dominant forces of European trucking: Scania, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, MAN, DAF, Renault, and Iveco. These were not scrappy tech startups. These were century-old industrial titans. Their business was forged in steel, diesel, and global logistics, not in video games. The team at SCS, a small independent studio in Prague, was about to walk into the boardroom of these giants and ask for the keys to their most valuable, most expensive, and most protected assets, their brand identity. This began the agonizing, multi-year process of courting the sisters. This is our human element for this section. You have to imagine the scene. Pavel Shabor and his team trying to find the right email address. Who do you even contact at a company like Mercedes-Benz to ask if you can put their flagship Actros truck in a game? Is it the marketing department? The legal department? The PR department in Stuttgart? The answer, for months and often years, was silence. Or, just as often, a polite but firm, no thank you. The resistance was understandable. From the perspective of a 100-year-old corporation, video games in the late 2000s still meant Need for Speed or Grand Theft Auto. They meant crashing, explosions, and irresponsible driving. The SCS team had to meticulously explain over and over that no, this was a simulation. It was a professional simulation. It was a game about obeying traffic laws, about parking carefully, about fuel efficiency. It was, they argued, the single greatest piece of positive marketing the trucking industry could ever ask for. It was a game that celebrated the brand, that celebrated the job. This brings us to our key historical fact. Euro Truck Simulator 2 launched in October 2012 without a full stack of licenses. This is the single best piece of evidence for how difficult this courting process was. The game hit the shelves, both digital and physical, with only a handful of the sisters convinced. The initial release featured fully licensed rigs from Scania, MAN and Renault, but the others, they were still the old familiar knockoffs from ETS2. The Majestic was back, standing in for Mercedes. The Valiant was the placeholder for Volvo. The DAV was DAF, and the IVD was Iveco. SCS hadn't failed. They had simply run out of time. They had to ship the game. They bet that launching with a few real brands was better than launching with none. This was an incredibly clever and risky strategy. And it leads us to our technical detail. The reason the licenses were so hard to get and so vital. SCS wasn't just asking for permission to use a logo. Thanks to the new modular engine, they were asking for something far more intimate, the manufacturing data. They didn't want to eyeball a Scania R series from photographs. They wanted to build it in the game, the same way it was built in the factory. They needed to know the exact dashboard layout, the precise number of switches, the authentic sound of the V8 engine, recorded from the real thing, the exact proprietary font used on the dashboard gauges. This level of detail was a double-edged sword. When they did get a manufacturer to listen, it was this commitment to accuracy that won them over. Scania, for example, was one of the first and most enthusiastic partners. They understood what SCS was doing. They provided detailed access, and in return, SCS created a digital showroom of their products so accurate it was practically a training tool. But for the more skeptical brands, this request for everything was terrifying. It was a massive internal security and intellectual property risk, so the game launched with its hybrid roster, part real, part fake. And a funny thing happened. The game became a smash hit far beyond SCS's wildest dreams. Suddenly, millions of players were happily driving the licensed Scanias, MANs and Renaults, and the Majestic and Valiant. They suddenly looked very lonely. The chicken and egg problem was solved. The game was now a proven global platform. The balance of power shifted. The brands that had held out, that had said no, were now conspicuously absent from the biggest trucking phenomenon on the planet. Their drivers, their fans, their employees were playing this game and asking, why isn't our truck in here? The emails SCS had been sending out were now starting to come in. Volvo was the next to fall, signing on in 2013, allowing the Valiant to be retired and replaced by the glorious fully licensed FH16. Then came Iveco. Then DAF. The final, most famous holdout was Mercedes-Benz. It took years. It wasn't until 2015, almost 3 years after the game's launch, that the Majestic was finally retired, and the Mercedes-Benz Actros rolled into the game, completing the Seven Sisters. This long, agonizing, and ultimately triumphant saga of the licenses was a game changer. It proved SCS's new philosophy: do it right, or not at all. With the engine built and the first trucks finally secured, they just needed a place to drive them. The new engine was humming. The first few hard-won licenses were secured, giving them a small but very real fleet of Scanias, MANs and Renaults. The digital garage, once an empty shell of code, now had the faint smell of new paint and diesel. But this victory immediately gave way to the next colossal task. They had built the ultimate driving machine, and now they had to build the ultimate road. They had to craft the world, and not just any world. They had to build Europe. This was in many ways a far more daunting task than even building the engine. How do you build a continent defined by 2,000 years of history? How do you capture, in a game, the difference between a Polish B-road and an Italian autostrada? The team's 18 wheels of steel experience was only partially helpful. Building the wide-open, grid-like, relatively young highways of the United States was a problem of scale. Building Europe was a problem of density and character. America was a marathon, Europe was a labyrinth. This forced the map team to develop a core design philosophy, one that defines the game to this day. That philosophy was essence over accuracy. They knew from the very beginning that a 1-1 recreation was not just impossible, it would be a terrible game. Who wants to spend 12 real-life hours driving from Berlin to Warsaw? And how could a small team in Prague possibly model every single street, every single village, every single landmark? They couldn't. They had to become editors. They had to be digital impressionists, capturing the feeling of a place, not a photograph of it. This philosophy directly led to the 1/19 scale we discussed, but it was so much more than that. It was an art. It was about choosing which highway to include and which to leave out. It was about identifying the signature architecture of a region, the half-timbered houses of Germany, the terracotta roofs of Italy, and using them to paint a believable backdrop. This brings us to our key historical fact. The base map that shipped with the game in October 2012 was a massive but strategically incomplete slice of the continent. It featured 60 cities spread across 12 countries. This initial map was heavily focused on Central and Western Europe. It included the United Kingdom, Germany, the eastern part of France, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, and a sliver of northern Italy. Spain, Portugal, Scandinavia, and the rest of Eastern Europe were, at launch, just empty spaces on the map, a tantalizing here be dragons that promised future expansion. This was a deliberate choice. It was the largest, most detailed world they could possibly build in the time they had, and it created a perfect, centralized sandbox for the game's economy. But how did they build it? This is where our technical detail comes in, and it's perhaps the most important piece of the game's entire structure, the prefab system. The world of Euro Truck Simulator 2 is not, as you might assume, built by hand, 1 kilometre at a time. That would be insane. Instead, the map builders work like the world's most complex model train enthusiasts. They have a vast digital library of prefabricated assets. These prefabs are self-contained chunks of the world. A complex cloverleaf highway interchange, that's one prefab. A specific type of roundabout common in the UK, that's another. A toll booth, a gas station, a border crossing, a ferry terminal, all prefabs. The city depots, the generic industrial buildings where you pick up and drop off cargo, all prefabs. The map team's job was to become master artists, stitching these complex pre-built pieces together with stretches of procedural road. They would lay down the highway, then fly to an intersection and drop in the correct country-specific interchange. They were, quite literally, building a continent out of high-tech building blocks. This system was the only way they could build a world of this scale and complexity, and it's the same system they still use today to expand the map. This, of course, led to some of the base game's famous quirks. Since the cities were often just a few streets, a few depots and a ring road, the original map of London became a bit of a running joke. It was a loop, a few intersections, and that was it. The majesty of a 2,000-year-old city, reduced to a functional roundabout. But this was the point. It was the essence. You weren't there to sightsee. You were there to work. This brings us to the human element, the scenery detectives. The map team, led by a small group of obsessive designers, was based in Prague, and as a result, the original 2012 map of the Czech Republic is, by far, the most lovingly, almost neurotically detailed part of the entire world. It was their home. They knew the curve of that specific highway, the look of that specific rest stop. But how to replicate the rest of Europe? They became digital explorers. They had team members who would, for days, just sit on Google Maps and virtually drive a stretch of road in, say, northern France. They didn't just look at the road, they looked at the clutter. What kind of guardrails do they use? What font is on that road sign? What colour are the lampposts? Is the asphalt a different colour from the asphalt in Germany 20 kilometres away? There are stories from that time of designers spending an entire afternoon arguing over the correct shade of green for a Polish road sign, or the exact placement of cat's eyes on a British motorway. This obsessive, almost fanatical attention to the mundane, the boring details of infrastructure was the secret sauce. They knew that a player might not consciously notice the correct font on an exit sign, but their subconscious would. It would feel right. This was the essence. The 2012 base map was the result of this philosophy. It was a triumph of clever illusion, a stage set of continental proportions. It had a bit of everything. The high-speed thrill of the German Autobahn, the tight claustrophobic challenge of a British A-road, the scenic climb of the Alps. It was a world that felt vast, varied, and most importantly, real enough. It was the perfect canvas. The engine was built. The first trucks were in the garage. The continent was painted and waiting. After 4 long, dark years of development, the single most ambitious project in SCS Software's history was finally ready. It was time to turn the key. The engine was built. The licenses were signed. The world was crafted. After 4 years of betting the entire company on this one singular vision, the moment of truth had arrived. On October 18th, 2012, SCS Software pushed the big, red, terrifying button. Euro Truck Simulator 2 was released to the world. There were no blockbuster trailers during a Super Bowl. There were no celebrity endorsements. The release was, much like the company itself, humble, quiet, and practical. The game was made available for purchase directly from their own website, a strategy that gave them a direct line to their customers and a larger share of the revenue. It was also, almost simultaneously, released on Steam, a digital distribution platform that was, at the time, just solidifying its ironclad grip on the PC gaming market. This two-pronged attack was clever, and, in a few niche circles, there were physical boxed copies of the game, mostly in European electronics and department stores. This is our key historical fact. The launch of Euro Truck Simulator 2 on October 18th, 2012 was not a singular event, but a quiet multi-channel release. For SCS, their hope was simply that the game would sell, that it would find its old established audience from the 18 Wheels and ETS2 days, and that this new, expensive 4-year project would, at the very least, break even. They had built their masterpiece, and now they just had to pray that someone would show up to the gallery. What they were not prepared for was the explosion. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a bang. It was a slow-burning fire that started in the weird, dark corners of the internet and then, with horrifying speed, erupted into a full-on mainstream inferno. The first people to notice it were, of course, the existing fans. the veterans of Hall-In and ETS1. For them, this new game was not an update, it was a religious experience. They booted it up and were greeted not with the floaty, majestic trucks of old, but with a fully licensed high-polygon Scania R series. They saw the rain, the real rain, beading on the windshield. They saw the dashboard light up at night. They felt the weight of the cargo on the first pull-away. The forums, which had been simmering with anticipation, absolutely detonated. It was, by all accounts, everything they had ever dreamed of, and more. But this existing community was just the kindling. The real fire started when the others found it. This brings us to our human element, the why am I playing this phenomenon. The game was discovered by the then emerging culture of Let's Play creators on YouTube. These were not sim gamers, these were people who played Call of Duty, Amnesia, The Dark Descent, or Minecraft. They saw this strange, nerdy-looking truck game from the Czech Republic topping the indie charts on Steam, and decided to try it, as a joke. The first wave of ETS2 videos are a masterclass in unintentional comedy. Okay, so we're a truck driver? Really? This is the game? We're driving. The commentary was thick with irony and sarcasm, and then you can hear the exact moment the joke dies and the addiction begins. It's usually about 30 minutes in. Wait, I need to get fuel? Okay, how do I... Oh, you have to turn the engine off. That's actually pretty cool. An hour in, no, don't cut me off, you stupid blue car. I have 20 tons of cheese to deliver to Berlin. 3 hours in. Alright guys, I'm ending this video here, but I'm going to keep playing this. I need to save up for the better engine. It was a virus. A peaceful, zen-like virus. Mainstream gaming journalists, who had completely ignored its development, were suddenly forced to review it. Their reviews all had the same bewildered tone. I have no idea why, but I cannot stop playing this. The game was a critical and commercial anomaly. It was non-violent. It was slow. It had no story, no explosions, no zombies. Its core gameplay loop was, on paper, boring. You drive, you obey traffic laws, you park, you get paid, you sleep, you do it again. And it was, for some inexplicable reason, one of the most compelling and addictive games of the decade. This runaway success was aided by a piece of pure old-school genius, our technical detail for this section, the generous demo model. SCS didn't offer a small cordoned-off demo area, they gave you the entire game, the full map, all the features. The catch? It was time-limited, or more accurately job-limited. You could play for a few hours, you could do a handful of jobs. This was a masterstroke of psychology. The demo was just long enough for you to complete your first driver-for-hire jobs. It was just long enough for you to get intrigued by the skills menu. And it was just long enough for you to visit the bank, take out your first loan and buy your very first truck. You'd be sitting there, in the configurator, excitedly choosing a metallic paint colour. And then the demo expired screen would pop up. The sheer, agonised need to get back into your truck to make your first loan payment was overwhelming. It was the most effective sales pitch imaginable. The game didn't just meet SCS's expectations, it shattered them, rebuilt them into a skyscraper, and then shattered them again. The sales were, for a studio of their size, transformative. The 4-year gamble didn't just pay off, it paid for the next 4 years, and the next. It gave them something they had never truly had before: freedom. They were no longer beholden to a yearly release schedule. They weren't trapped in the budget title box. They were now the custodians of a global, multi-million copy-selling phenomenon. The tiny, humble garage in Prague was now a global headquarters. The game had launched. The world had inexplicably fallen in love with the digital highway. But for the team at SCS, the work was only just beginning. The launch was a success, but the game was far from perfect. The physics, while a huge leap, was still a bit weird. The audio was thin, and the map, while big, was only the beginning. The launch wasn't an end. It was the starting line of a marathon that is still being run to this day. The game was a runaway hit. The servers were stable, the sales were pouring in, and the team at SCS Software had by any measure succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They could have at this point put their feet up. They could have popped the champagne, taken a long, well-deserved vacation, and perhaps started sketching out a new 18 Wheels of Steel game to capitalise on their newfound fame. But they didn't. The grand blueprint wasn't just about a successful launch. It was about building a masterpiece. And to the obsessive perfectionist team in Prague, the game that had just conquered the world was, in their eyes, still deeply, fundamentally flawed. The problem? It didn't feel right. Not completely. The initial response from hardcore sim fans, nestled amongst the rave reviews, was a consistent nagging critique. The trucks, while beautiful, felt a bit light. They felt arcadey. They turned a little too sharply. They stopped a little too quickly. They felt at times like the 40-ton semi-truck was just a skin draped over a very fast, very large and slightly floaty sports car. And the sound? Oh, the sound! The audio at launch was thin. The engines hummed on a single, repetitive and not very convincing loop. It was the generic vacuum cleaner sound that haunts low-budget racing games. SCS agreed. They knew it. They had made 1,000 compromises to get the game out the door, and now, flush with cash and a mandate from millions of players, they set out to fix it. This began the great post-launch era of the 1.x updates. This is our key historical fact. The period from late 2012 through 2014 was defined by a series of massive free updates, like 1.4, 1.9, 1.14, that were not simple bug fix patches. They were fundamental, ground-up overhauls of the game's core systems. SCS was taking the enormous profits from ETS2 and, instead of pocketing them, was pouring them directly back into the engine, live, while millions of people were playing. The first target was the physics of weight. The team went back to the code, tweaking the tyre friction model, the centre of gravity calculations, the way the trailer's mass pushed the truck. This was a long, painful and iterative process. Every time they fixed something, it would break something else. Make the trucks heavier, and suddenly they couldn't get up the game's existing hills. Increase the tyre grip, and suddenly a 90-degree turn at 50 mep wouldn't flip the truck, which was wrong. It was a dark art, a constant balancing act between realism and fun. But the single greatest leap forward in game feel came from a feature that, on paper, sounds tiny. This is our technical detail, the implementation of cabin suspension and driver physics. At launch, the player's camera, your head, was rigidly bolted to the truck's chassis. When the truck hit a bump, you hit a bump. It was jarring, and it wasn't real. In a real truck, the cab floats on its own set of springs and dampers, and the driver's seat also has its own air suspension. The new update introduced a separate physics model for the cabin itself. The chassis would hit a bump, the cabin would float and sway in response, and your head, the camera, would then bob and jiggle based on the seat suspension. When this patch dropped, it was a revelation. For the first time, you weren't just steering a 3D model, you were inside a machine. You felt the jiggle of the engine at idle. You felt the cabin lurch as you released the brakes. It was the magic non-verbal ingredient that communicated weight and presence, more than any spreadsheet of friction values ever could. The second part of the feel was the sound. This is our human element, the aural obsession. The community was relentless about the audio, and the SCS team, being nerds of the highest order, were just as obsessed. They hated the launch audio too. This began a years-long and incredibly expensive quest for sound truth. SCS began hiring audio engineers and sending them out to truck stops, depots and Scania factories with a frightening array of high-end microphones. This wasn't just point a mic at the exhaust and hit record. It was a science. They were capturing layers. They'd put one mic on the engine block, one at the exhaust, one at the air intake, two inside the cabin to get the driver's ear perspective, and one by the gearbox. They'd record the truck at idle, under heavy load, at 2000 RPM, at 900 RPM. They recorded the Jake brake. They recorded the hiss of the air brakes, a sound that is to a trucker as important as a heartbeat. They recorded the click of the indicator stalk. They recorded the whine of the turbocharger. They then took these dozens of separate, pristine audio channels back to the office and fed them into a new, complex audio engine, FMOD. This engine could now dynamically mix these sounds in real time. As you pressed the accelerator, it wouldn't just turn up the volume on a single loop, it would fade in the engine load track, mix it with the turbo whine track, and blend in the exhaust note, all based on your RPM. This quest for perfect audio was a sign of a new commitment. The game wasn't a product anymore, it was a service, a platform. This constant free evolution built a level of fan loyalty that most developers would kill for. It proved that the team in Prague was in this for the long haul. The game was healing. The constant free updates to the physics and the audio, that obsessive quest for the feel of a real truck, were sutures on the game's original wounds. The core was solidifying. The fans were loyal, protective even. SCS Software, by pouring all its launch profits back into the game as free improvements, had built a reservoir of goodwill that was almost unprecedented in the industry. But goodwill does not keep the lights on forever. It doesn't pay the salaries of an expanding team of 3D artists, programmers, and audio engineers. The free updates were a brilliant way to retain players, but they weren't a business model for growth. The team in Prague was now, once again, at a crossroads. They had a world that millions of players were crisscrossing daily, but those players were, by now, getting familiar with that world. They knew the curve of the highway outside Berlin. They knew the precise shortcut through the industrial estate in London. The base map, once so vast, was beginning to feel a bit like a well-worn, comfortable neighbourhood. The players, and the developers, were getting the itch to explore. But how? This was the new gamble. How do you, after a year of giving away massive game-changing improvements for free, suddenly turn to your community and ask for more money? The risk was enormous. A single misstep could shatter that hard-won goodwill. They could be branded as greedy. The forums could turn from celebration to condemnation overnight. They had to be careful. They decided on a philosophy, a social contract that they would in essence propose to their players. The core game, the engine, the physics, the trucks, the UI, the core experience that would always be improved for free. Patches, new features like cabin suspension, updates to truck models. That would be part of the 1.x updates, a gift to everyone who owned the game. But new land, new world, that was different. That was not a fix. That was a creation. That was an expansion. And that, they decided, would be the product. This led to the key historical fact. In September 2013, just under a year after the game's triumphant launch, SCS Software released Going East. This was the first ever paid map expansion for Euro Truck Simulator 2. It was a test, a small, modestly priced package, around €10, that would be the canary in the coal mine. Would the community buy it, or would they revolt? The content of Going East was the key. This couldn't just be more of the same. It couldn't just be a few more German cities bolted onto the side. It had to be a new flavour, a new experience. This brings us to our geographic detail. The expansion didn't just add 13 new cities, it pushed the map into a whole new part of Europe. It expanded and dramatically improved the existing but somewhat sparse areas of Poland and the Czech Republic, and for the first time, it added Slovakia and a large part of Hungary. This wasn't just a geographical shift. It was an atmospheric one. The Going East content felt different. The artists and map designers had leaned into the essence philosophy. The highways in many places were narrower. The infrastructure felt older. The new prefabs, those high-tech building blocks, were all new. They reflected the post-Soviet architecture of the region, the functional, sometimes brutalist depots, the different styles of residential buildings, the unique layouts of the rural gas stations. The AI felt, to many players, a little more unpredictable on these new, tighter roads. Driving from the pristine, polished superhighways of the German base map and crossing the border into Poland felt like a real event. The road signs changed, the landscape flattened, the challenges shifted. It was, in a word, new. And this created our human element, the new frontier effect. The players who bought it loved it. The gamble had paid off instantly. Far from a revolt, there was celebration. The forums and the nascent YouTube community exploded with new content. My first drive to Warsaw, exploring Budapest, this crazy back road in Slovakia. The base map had become the commute, Going east was the adventure. It was the first time since the game's launch that players felt that delicious, intoxicating spark of exploration, of not knowing what was over the next hill. The commercial success of Going East was, in the long run, even more important than the launch of the base game. It didn't just make money, it proved the model. It solidified the dual-track system that would fund the company for the next decade. It was a stroke of genius. The free core updates meant that the base game never felt old or abandoned. A new player buying ETS2 in 2014, 2 years after its release, was getting a vastly superior product, with better physics, sound, and features than the player who bought it at launch, all for the same price. This kept the barrier to entry low and the reviews eternally positive. Meanwhile, the paid DLC track gave the dedicated hardcore fans exactly what they wanted: more world, more roads, more challenges, more game. And it gave SCS a stable, predictable, and enormous revenue stream. This revenue stream allowed them to keep expanding the free team, to keep pouring money into the core engine, which in turn made the next paid DLC even better. The Going East gamble had been a resounding success. The social contract was signed. The community had agreed to the terms: keep making the core game better for free, and we will happily pay you to make the world bigger. The quiet little studio in Prague now had a license to print money and a license to build. The first expansion was a success, but the team, they were already looking at it and at their own base map and finding it lacking. They knew they could do better, much better. The success of the Going East expansion was a quiet, profound validation. The team at SCS had proven their new business model. The social contract was sealed. The community would happily pay for new, high-quality worlds as long as the core game continued to be nurtured for free. This dual-track approach was working. The company was stable. The future was bright. And now, with a secure financial footing and a team that was growing in both size and confidence, they looked at the map. They looked north, to the lands of fjords, forests, and advanced industrial design. They looked to Scandinavia, and this time, the goal wasn't just to make the world bigger. The goal was to make it better. Unbelievably, impossibly, fundamentally better. Going East had been a success, but it was, technologically and artistically, an evolution of the 2012 base map. It used the same prefab systems, the same design philosophy, just with a new coat of regional paint. It was more. But the map team, now seasoned veterans, were looking at their own work with a growing sense of dissatisfaction. The illusion was impressive, but they knew where all the seams were. They knew the shortcuts. They were tired of the generic loop road cities. They were tired of the identical rectangular depots. They wanted to do something new. This is our key historical fact. The Euro Truck Simulator 2 Scandinavia DLC was released in May 2015. This was not a quick one-year turnaround. It was a nearly 2-year development cycle after the Going East expansion. This, in itself, was a signal. The team was not churning out content, they were crafting. This 2-year gap was spent not just mapping out Denmark, Norway and Sweden, but completely reinventing their entire philosophy of world building. The Scandinavia DLC was the moment SCS Software went from being a game maker to a world builder. The essence philosophy was still the rule, but the resolution of that essence was increased 1,000 times. The team's new mantra was, no more generic locations. This brings us to the single greatest revolution of this expansion, our technical and geographic detail, the birth of the unique asset and the complex depot. The old prefab system, where a city was just a few generic warehouses dropped around a ring road, was thrown in the trash. The map team started handcrafting. They built hundreds, if not thousands, of new unique 3D models. Not just a bridge, but the Øresund Bridge, or at least its essence, a magnificent sweeping arc connecting Denmark and Sweden. Not just a factory, but the actual Scania factory in Södertälje, the actual Volvo Trucks factory in Gothenburg. This was a paradigm shift. For the first time, you weren't just delivering cargo to a warehouse. You were picking up a new truck from the Volvo factory, and to do so, you had to navigate the actual factory's complex multi-level labyrinthine yard. You had to find the right loading bay, check in at a security gate, and thread your trailer through a maze of other trucks and internal roadways. These new depots were not just destinations, they were levels, they were puzzles. They were, in some cases, more challenging and terrifying than the open highway. The old pull into the green rectangle was gone. The Scandinavia DLC was the first time a player could and often did get lost inside a delivery location. And the world between these new, bespoke cities, it was beautiful. The new engine improvements, which were of course free in the Parallel 1.x patches, allowed for a new lighting system, new weather, and new shaders. The Scandinavia artists used this new technical paint palette to create a world of staggering and often subtle beauty. The long, lonely, pine tree-lined highways of central Sweden, the dramatic, winding, claustrophobic roads carved into the rock of a Norwegian fjord, with the water gleaming impossibly far below, the gentle, rolling farmland and quaint red houses of Denmark. It was the first time the world felt less like a map and more like a place. This leads directly to our human element, the player as tourist. The community's reaction to going east was cool, more roads. The reaction to Scandinavia was, whoa, just whoa. Forums and the new Steam community hubs began to fill with something new. Not just questions about which truck is best or how to make money. They began to fill with screenshots, beautifully composed, artistic screenshots. Players were stopping. They were finding a scenic overlook, pulling their rig onto the shoulder, often illegally, but who's counting, and using the new photo mode to capture the sunset over a fjord. They were making YouTube videos that weren't Let's Play tutorials, but were in essence travel vlogs. Just a quiet 30-minute drive down a rainy Norwegian coastal road, set to ambient music. This was the DLC that turned Euro Truck Simulator 2 from a driving sim into an exploration and relaxation game. The bedtime drives of the future were born here, in this new, gorgeous, handcrafted world. People weren't just hauling cargo, they were sightseeing. They were taking their 60-ton rig on a scenic vacation. The Scandinavia DLC was a masterpiece. It was a staggering commercial and critical success. It was, in every way, a triumph. And it was, for SCS, an absolute unmitigated disaster. Because it was too good. It was so good, so beautiful, so detailed, that it instantly and violently made the entire rest of the game look like a relic from a bygone era. Players would finish a stunning handcrafted 45-minute delivery through a Norwegian mountain pass, and then get a job back in the base map in Germany. And they would be plunged back into the old world, back to the generic cities, back to the 2012-era textures, back to the simple, identical depots. It was like watching a 4K Blu-ray and then switching to a blurry third-generation VHS tape. The Scandinavia DLC set a new standard. It was the new Euro Truck Simulator 2, and in doing so, it signed a death warrant for the old Euro Truck Simulator 2. The team at SCS, standing on their mountain of new, well-deserved profit, looked back at the sprawling, beloved and now hideous base map, and they knew. They knew what they had to do. They had to go back. They had to rebuild the entire world. The team in Prague was facing an existential crisis born of their own success. The Scandinavia DLC was a masterpiece, a high watermark for the studio. It was gorgeous, it was complex, and it was bespoke. And now, it was a monster of their own creation. It was so good that it had, overnight, rendered 90% of their own game obsolete. The social contract, free core updates, paid world expansions was in jeopardy, because the core was now the worst part of the game. The VHS versus Blu-ray problem was not a niche complaint from hardcore fans. It was a glaring, unavoidable truth. This wasn't just a quality gap, it was a chasm. A player could spend an hour in a breathtaking, handcrafted Scandinavia-level world, and then get a high-paying long-haul job that routed them south, into the old world. The moment they crossed the invisible border into the 2012-era base map, the world deflated. The lighting felt flat. The textures turned to mush. The cities became the same 4 identical grey warehouses arranged in a box. The complex, unique Scandinavia depots were replaced by a simple green rectangle on the pavement. It was, in a word, depressing. It shattered the illusion. SCS was now a company with 2 different warring games living under the same roof. The new, beautiful, profitable ETS2 and the old, clunky but essential ETS2. And the old world was the hub. Germany, in particular, the heart of the base map, was the crossroads of the entire continent. You couldn't avoid it. It was the central, rotting core of an otherwise beautiful apple. They couldn't just ignore it. They couldn't just keep building new beautiful places like the upcoming Vive la France or Italia DLCs, while the central hub of their game was a relic. Every new DLC would just make the old map look worse by comparison. This would, inevitably, breed resentment. It would break the trust. So, in a decision that still boggles the minds of industry accountants, they decided on the most difficult, expensive, and time-consuming solution possible. They decided to rebuild the entire world for free. This is the key historical fact for this section. Around 2016, SCS Software formally split its map-making department into 2 distinct teams. The first, the A team, was the new DLC team. Their job was to work on the next paid expansion, the new Sexy Frontier. The second, a new, large, and equally important team was formed. They were the Old World Rework team. Their job? To go back to the 2012 base map, armed with the new Scandinavia level tools and standards, and, piece by piece, bulldoze it and rebuild it from scratch. This was not a touch-up. It was not a remaster. It was a total ground-up remake of the original game world, delivered in small digestible chunks over the course of years, as part of the free 1.x patch cycle. This project, which is still ongoing today, is perhaps the single greatest act of community goodwill in modern gaming. Their first target? The biggest, oldest, and most important problem: Germany. The 2012-era Germany was a tangled, illogical mess of spaghetti highways and generic cities. The Rework of Germany project was a multi-year epic. This is our technical detail. The old world map was not edited. It was deleted. The Rework team would literally draw a box around, say, the city of Berlin and a 200-kilometre radius of highway around it, and hit delete. All the old roads, the old assets, the old depots, gone. Then, on that blank canvas, they would build a new Berlin, a 2017 spec Berlin. This new Berlin would be built using the new Scandinavia philosophy. It would have bespoke, unique depots. It would have a complex, realistic ring road. The highways connecting to it would no longer be simple, 90-degree turns. The team had built a massive new library of prefab interchanges based on real German Autobahnkreuz designs. These were vast, sprawling, and beautiful pieces of engineering. The Rework of Germany was less of a map update and more of a total national infrastructure project. This leads us to our human element, the construction zone community. Because this project was so massive, it was released in phases. A free update, say patch 1.32, would drop. In the patch notes, alongside new sound support, would be a simple line: Rework of Germany, Phase 1, Hanover, Berlin. The community's reaction was electric. Players would become construction tourists. The moment the patch was live, thousands of players would flood the new Berlin. They'd make YouTube before and after comparison videos, showing the clunky old 2012 city side by side with the stunning, sprawling 2017 spec metropolis. They would park their trucks on the overpasses of the new Autobahnkreuz, just to marvel at the complexity. This live surgery on the game world wasn't a chore. It was an event. It was proof in real time that the social contract was real. SCS was reinvesting the money from the new DLCs to make the old game better for everyone. This project, of course, never stopped. After years of work, the Rework of Germany was finally finished, well, for now. The team immediately moved on. They reworked Austria. They reworked the entire Going East DLC, bringing Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary up to the modern standard, again, for free. As of our journey tonight, they are deep in the middle of the rework of the UK, one of the oldest and most beloved, and therefore most dated parts of the original map. It is a Sisyphean task. It is the ship of Theseus of video games. By the time they finish reworking the UK, the Scandinavia DLC, the one that started this whole mess, will probably be considered outdated and in need of its own rework. But this is the genius of SCS. This endless, free, parallel project is the foundation of trust upon which the entire empire is built. It keeps the home world, the core of the game, alive and vibrant. It ensures that a new player buying the base game in 2025 is getting a product that is more beautiful and more complex than all the 2015 era DLC combined. It makes buying the next paid DLC not feel like a transaction, but like an investment in a universe that, you know, for a fact, will only get better with time. The world was healing. The Ship of Theseus project to rebuild the entire base map was in full swing, a massive free undertaking that was solidifying player trust into something more akin to adoration. The Scandinavia DLC had set a new, impossibly high bar for what a world could be, and the upcoming Vive la France expansion was promising to raise it even higher. The game was beautiful. It was vast. It was, by 2016, a digital continent you could truly get lost in. But what was the point of it all? The world, no matter how beautiful, is just a container. The game, the job, was hauling cargo. And for all the stunning next-generation beauty of the new landscapes, the cargo system itself was still stuck in 2012. It was the game's dirty little secret, the one part of the simulation that wasn't really a simulation. At launch, and for years after, cargo was just an abstract. It was a label, used electronics, frozen fish, chemicals, and a number, the weight. You never saw the electronics. You never interacted with the fish. You'd go to the freight market, click a job, and the game would spawn a generic sealed box trailer for you. You'd hook up, drive, drop it in the green rectangle, and get paid. The trailer wasn't yours. The type of cargo was irrelevant, beyond the few little icons on your skills page. Hauling 20 tons of cheese felt exactly the same as hauling 20 tons of iron pipes, just with a different paycheck. The team at SCS, fresh off their world-building triumphs, now turned their attention to this long-neglected abstract system. And, in typical SCS fashion, they didn't just want to tweak it. They wanted to revolutionize it. They wanted to make the cargo as deep and as real as the world it was being hauled through. This began the cargo revolution, a multi-stage, multi-year process. The first and most profound change was a key historical fact, the decoupling of trailers from cargo. This began in 2017 with a series of free updates around the 130-132 patches that fundamentally re-engineered the game's economy. Until this point, you could only own tractors. The trailers were rented for each job. The update introduced a new, revolutionary tab in the menu, Trailer Purchase. This one, simple-sounding feature was a tectonic shift in the game's DNA. This is our technical detail, the separation of the freight market from the new cargo market. Now, you could buy your own trailer, a flatbed, a refrigerated reefer unit, a curtain sider, a chemical tanker. You could customize it, paint it to match your truck, upgrade its tires. It was yours. But here was the genius. You could no longer take any job. If you owned a flatbed, you could no longer haul frozen fish. The freight market, the old list of trailer-included jobs, was still there for beginners, but the real money, the real simulation, was now in the cargo market. When you drove your empty flatbed to a depot, the cargo market would only show you jobs that could go on a flatbed. Lumber, tractor, concrete pipes. You would then, in-world, back your empty trailer into the loading dock, get the cargo, and head out. This created our human element, the rise of the specialist. The entire player base and the RPG meta changed overnight. Before, everyone was a generalist. Now you could be a reefer hauler. You could be a heavy haul specialist. Players began to build companies, not just garages. They'd have a fleet of 10 curtain-siders running out of Germany and a specialised team of 5 chemical tanker drivers in the Netherlands. It made your choices matter. Owning a trailer was a risk. It cost money. It had maintenance. But the cargo market jobs paid more. giving you a real tangible reward for your investment. The game's role-playing, its simulation of running a business, just took a quantum leap in depth. But SCS wasn't done. The first part of the revolution was about ownership. The second part was about spectacle. This came in the form of a series of paid DLCs, but the most game-changing was the Special Transport DLC. This wasn't just new cargo. This was a new game mode masquerading as a DLC. This was SCS looking at the quiet, zen-like sleepy time drive nature of their game and adding a boss battle. The cargo in this pack wasn't just heavy, it was enormous. 70-ton industrial heat exchangers, massive building-sized silos, the chassis of a dump truck, a 94-ton locomotive. These objects were so large they were not legal to haul in the normal game. This is our second technical detail of this revolution, the escort mission system. When you accepted a special transport job, the entire game changed. The route was locked. You could not detour. You were assigned by the AI 2 escort vehicles, a pilot car in front and a chaser car in the rear. These AI-controlled escorts were not just for show, they were your team. The pilot car, with its flashing yellow lights, would drive ahead, and its driver would block traffic at intersections. It would literally stop oncoming cars and red lights so your massive oversized convoy could make an impossibly tight turn. Your GPS was gone, replaced by simple instructions from the escort. Keep up the pace. Prepare for a tight turn ahead. The human element of this was pure, unadulterated stress. In a good way. The zen was gone. This was 45 minutes of white-knuckle, sweaty-palmed concentration. You were crawling at 30, maybe 40 kilometers per hour. You were threading a 10-meter wide object through a 12-meter wide gap. The escort car is yelling at you to watch your left side and watch your left. If you hit a car, if you tapped a guardrail, if you even deviated from the route, the mission failed instantly. Back to the start. This was a performance. It was a challenge. The feeling of relief, of victory, when you finally wrestled that 70-ton beast into the final drop-off zone with the escort cars flashing their lights and the AI saying good job. It was a dopamine hit on par with defeating a boss in Elden Ring. The cargo revolution, in these 2 phases, had added the final, critical layers. The trailer ownership update added a deep, complex economic and RPG layer. The Special Transport DLC added a high-stakes, high-skill challenge layer. The game was no longer just drive from A to B, it was now a simulation of an entire career. We have journeyed through the official, meticulously crafted universe of Euro Truck Simulator 2. We have seen the engine rebuilt from nothing. We've watched the agonizing process of courting the Seven Sisters. We've seen the world itself evolve from a 2012-era facade into the stunning, bespoke Blu-ray world of the modern DLCs. We've explored the revolution in cargo, from simple boxes to 90-ton boss battles. But to tell this story, to only tell this story, would be to ignore a parallel universe. A massive, sprawling and impossibly creative shadow world built by the one group of people more obsessed with the game than the developers themselves, the players. SCS Software was born from the old-school, PC garage developer ethos of the 1990s. The team in Prague were tinkerers, coders, and at heart, players. They understood something about the PC platform that many larger, more corporate-minded studios had forgotten. People love to mess with their toys. They love to take things apart, look inside, and put them back together in weird new ways. From the very beginning, SCS didn't just tolerate the idea of modding their game. They quietly encouraged it. This is our key historical fact. Euro Truck Simulator 2 was intentionally built to be mod-friendly. This wasn't an accident. While the Prism 3D engine is proprietary, the game's file structure, the way it stores its trucks, its textures, its sounds, its map data, was left remarkably open and accessible. It used common, easily editable file formats. There were no high-tech encrypted walls built to keep people out. It was less of a fortress and more of a house with the keys left under the mat. SCS was, in effect, leaving a welcome note for the community, and that note read, "Come on in, show us what you've got." They had no idea what they were about to unleash. The first mods were simple, as they always are. New paint jobs for the trucks, a mod that removed the 90 km/h speed limiter, a favourite of the truly anarchic. A new beefier 5,000 horsepower engine that would let you haul a block of cheese up the side of the Alps like a rocket. These were fun, they were tweaks, and then came ProMods. This is our technical detail, and it is without a doubt the single most important, influential and staggering mod in the game's entire history. ProMods is not a mod, it's a parallel Euro Truck Simulator 2. It is a massive fan-made, community-run map expansion project that, for the last decade, has been building the rest of Europe and rebuilding the old parts to a standard that often rivals or even exceeds SCS's own official quality. A small group of wildly talented and slightly insane amateur mapmakers looked at the ETS2 world and said, "It's good, but it's not enough." They wanted more. They wanted Ireland. They wanted Iceland. They wanted the Faroe Islands. They wanted Spain, years before SCS officially built it. They wanted the Balkans. They wanted to rebuild the UK before SCS got around to it. And so, they just did. ProMods is a free, downloadable expansion that stitches itself almost seamlessly onto the official game. It requires you to own all of the official SCS map DLCs, creating a brilliant symbiotic "you must buy the official game to play our free mod" relationship. And it is breathtaking. It is a work of art. The ProMods team are essence impressionists of the highest order. Their version of Iceland, with its volcanic, snow-dusted alien landscapes and its one lonely ring road, is one of the most terrifying and beautiful drives in all of simulation. Their recreation of the tangled, ancient, claustrophobic roads of Ireland is a masterclass in frustration and beauty. This project, which would in any other company be met with a swift cease and desist letter from the legal department, was met by SCS with applause. This is our human element, the symbiotic, respectful, and actively collaborative relationship between SCS and the modding community. SCS doesn't just tolerate ProMods, they publicly celebrate it. They feature ProMods creators on their official blogs, they cheerlead their releases. But here is the most important part, they hire them. When the team at SCS saw the staggering quality of the Scandinavia DLC, it was, in part, because they had hired some of the best creators from the modding scene to help build it. This became their new recruitment pipeline, a strategy of pure genius. Why post a job available ad when you can just browse the Steam Workshop, find the most talented mapmaker, 3D modeler or sound designer on the planet, a person who is already obsessed with your game and knows your tools inside and out, and send them an email that says, "How would you like to get paid for this?" Many of the key senior members of the current SCS map team, the people building the official future of ETS2, began their careers as ProMods creators. They're not stealing talent, they're graduating it. This ecosystem is the game's ultimate immune system. It's the fourth pillar of its success. You have the core game, you have the free 1.x updates rebuilding the old world, you have the paid DLCs expanding the new world, and then you have the infinite modding layer, which fills in every other conceivable crack. Want to drive a truck they'll never license, like a classic 1980s Sisu? There's a mod for that. Want hyper-realistic rain sounds recorded from inside a real Scania? There's a mod for that. Want a physics model that truly punishes you for taking a corner too fast? There's a mod. For a massive dedicated chunk of the player base, the vanilla game is just the foundation. Their real ETS2 is a carefully curated 50-item-long mod list, with ProMods at its heart. This ecosystem makes the game quite literally immortal. Even if SCS were to vanish tomorrow, the modding community would carry ETS2 for another decade, easily. It is the final brilliant piece of the puzzle, all stemming from that original humble, let's leave the keys under the mat philosophy. And so, here we are. We have travelled a long, long road together tonight, a journey that began not in a shiny new rig, but in a small, hopeful office in 1997 Prague. We've seen the birth of the Prism 3D engine, a humble tool built not for a specific game, but for a distant dream. We've rattled across the empty, charming, corridor-like maps of the 18 Wheels of Steel era, the proving ground that built the company and paid the bills. We saw the team come home for the first awkward and experimental Eurotruck Simulator 1. We felt their ambition as they stood on that 4-year cliff of development, tearing down their own creation to build the foundation for ETS2. We've sat with them in the dark as they rebuilt that engine, line by agonising line. We've been in the room as they nervously courted the Seven Sisters, begging for a licence. We saw the 2012 launch, the explosion of "Why am I playing this?" on YouTube, and the birth of a phenomenon. We've felt the jiggle of the new cabin physics, the first real sign of weight. We've heard the sound, as the audio team's obsession took us from a vacuum cleaner hum to the multi-layered Fmod-powered roar of a real V8. We've driven the Scandinavia DLC, that great, beautiful, disastrous masterpiece that set a new standard, and forced the team to, in an act of beautiful madness, begin rebuilding their entire original world for free. We've felt the stress of the 90-ton special transport and the quiet pride of owning our very first trailer, and we have peeked into the shadow universe of the modding community, the ProMods team, the graduates who became the game's future. This brings us to the end of our road, and to the final, biggest question. Why? Why this game? In a world of fleeting trends, of yearly franchises and disposable flavour-of-the-month hits, why has this one, simple, boring simulation of a blue-collar job endured for well over a decade, how has it sold tens of millions of copies? This is the key historical fact of its entire legacy. Eurotruck Simulator 2 has, for more than 10 years, remained a fixture on the Steam top sellers chart, a feat that defies all logic of the modern gaming industry. It has done so not with hype, but with a quiet, relentless, hypnotic hum. The legacy of ETS2 is not the game that was released in 2012. That game, as we've seen, is almost completely gone. It's been replaced piece by piece, like a ship of Theseus on an endless highway. Its legacy is that it accidentally created an entirely new genre of experience. It is not at its heart a game. It is a place. This is our technical and geographic detail for this final leg. The decade-long highway is not a static object. It is, today, one of the single largest, most detailed and most cohesive open worlds in video game history. When you combine the official, ever-expanding and ever-reworked SCS map with the sprawling professional-grade universe of ProMods, you're left with a drivable Shadow Europe that is by any measure one of the grandest artistic achievements in the medium. It is a live service game that was born before the term was a cynical marketing speak. It is a subscription, paid not in monthly fees, but in goodwill. The price is a €15 DLC every 18 months, and in return, you get a world that is always, always getting better. And that is the final piece, the human element. The true legacy of Eurotruck Simulator 2 is us. It's the community. It's the why. People don't play ETS2 to win. They play it to be. They play it to unwind after a 12-hour shift in a real job. They play it to listen to a 3-hour podcast. They play it to learn geography, to virtually visit the Norwegian fjords or the Italian coast. They play it, as we're doing right now, to sleep. It is a sanctuary. In a world of noise, ETS2 is quiet. In a world of high-stress, competitive, violent feedback loops, ETS2 is a gentle, single-track road. The only enemy is your own impatience, your own fatigue, that one tricky off-camber reverse park at 3 a.m. in a rainy, windswept depot in Aberdeen. It's a game that asks for nothing from you but your time, and in return it gives you peace. A meditative, hypnotic, digital zen. From the solitary drivers of the main game to the thousands who flock to the chaotic, human, and often hilarious Truckers MP multiplayer mod, it is a shared space. It's a testament to a studio that never sold out, that never wavered from its one simple, distant dream. They just wanted to build a world, and in the end, they built a home. It has been a long journey from that first garage in Prague to this digital continent, a decade-long highway that, for all of us, seems to have no end. The story, for now, is told. The chronicle is complete. We've seen the code, the art, the long nights of development, and the quiet, humble ambition that turned a niche simulator into a global, zen-like phenomenon. And now, the road is quiet. The last of the traffic has faded. The sun, which we saw rise over the new Prism Marie engine, has long since set. All that is left is the sound, the deep, gentle hum of the engine, a soft baritone against the night, the faint rhythmic thwip-thwip of the wipers, keeping the gentle drizzle at bay, the soft rush of the wind over the mirrors, the quiet, hypnotic drone of the tyres on the wet asphalt, a sound that has become a lullaby for millions. The glow from the dashboard is a warm, amber fire, casting soft shadows, illuminating just enough of the road ahead. There is no next turn, there is no cargo deadline, the depot is far, far behind us, and the next one, it is not yet on the horizon. There is only this moment, this cab, this steady, safe forward motion. You can feel the weight of the rig, but it is a comforting weight, a stable anchor in the dark. Your eyes are getting heavy. The white lines on the road are starting to blur just a little, pulling you forward, pulling you down. It's all right, you can let go, there's nowhere else you need to be, you're safe, you are home, just let the engine's hum carry you away. Just sleep.